This meeting that is organized year after year has come to be known for its excellence in quality and academia, and I am very proud to be part of it. And thank you, Dr. Jayakrishnan, for having me here. I am acutely aware that I am standing between you all and the lunch, and I hope that a radical move from what you have been discussing for the last 2 hours to a topic that is entirely different might jolt you all and perhaps make you stay. The topic is cervical intraepithelial neoplasia. Now, the definition of cervical intraepithelial neoplasia, please note, is a histopathological description in which part or full thickness of the stratified squamous epithelium is replaced by cells showing varying degrees of dysplasia. What you need to actually pay attention to is the fact that it is a histopathological diagnosis. So, cervical intraepithelial neoplasia is no longer psychological diagnosis, and therefore we do not actually make an absolute diagnosis of a CIN based on cytology, nor do we decide on management. The incidence in India is about 15 per 1,000. Now, before we go on to any discussion about cervical intraepithelial neoplasia, it's important for you all to understand the concept of transformation zone, which I'm sure you all are aware of, but I just want to recapitulate to tell you that the vagina to a varying level is lined by the squamous epithelium in the premenarcheal girl, and the endocervical canal and the ectocervix to some extent by a single layer columnar epithelium, and during the reproductive age with a lot of stimuli, maybe multiple childbirth, maybe exposure to various agents, maybe human papillomavirus, whatever it is, there is basically in a physiological way, the columnar epithelium is slowly replaced by squamous epithelium. So there is a squamocolumnar junction originally, and there is a squamocolumnar junction which is a current one, which actually moves up and up into the endocervical canal, moves cephalad, and comes to lie sometime inside, somewhere within the endocervical canal in the postmenopausal woman. So this zone between the current squamocolumnar junction and the original squamocolumnar junction is what is known as the transformation zone. It is understandable that with this level of epithelial proliferation and activity by way of metaplasia, this particular zone is prone to any stimulant or anything that may act on it, and so this normal process of metaplasia to a normal epithelium can take off at a tangent and can become a dysplastic epithelium, and therefore most malignancies of the cervix originate here. So this is the end-on view of the transformation zone. As you can see, the original transformation zone and the current transformation, the original squamocolumnar junction and the current squamocolumnar junction, and therefore the transformation zone. So how does CIN or cervical intraepithelial neoplasia occur? We have to understand that it is a process continuum. As in, the CIN3 or invasive cervical cancer doesn't crop up all of a sudden. It starts off as a very minimal change by way of CIN1 and then continuously moves on to become CIN2 and 3. So it's a process continuum, and it is an advantage in the sense that you can actually diagnose and perhaps stop it at some point. HPV infection is undoubtedly the etiological agent, and it is necessary for the development of cervical intraepithelial neoplasia or cervical cancer. And there are 4 major steps in this infection. Number 1, the first thing that happens is the infection of the metaplastic epithelium and the transformation zone. This happens in adolescence during sexual activity. It happens at any age. This doesn't mean cancer, or this doesn't mean that it's going to become cancer. There is subsequently the next phase where there is a viral persistence reflecting a host immune status. So of the women who are affected or infected with human papillomavirus, a whole lot of them are able to eliminate it, but the viral persistence occurs in some women due to host immune response, and subsequently this progression of infected cell to cancer cell happens, and then happens the invasion. Of course, I am not going to go into details of how many HPV there are, etc. Available in all your books. There are high risk and low risk human papillomavirus infections. The most infections are transient. When persistent, we need to understand that when the infection, HPV, persists, the HPV genome or the genetic whatever DNA material goes and sits in the host cell nucleus in the cervical epithelium. Now that alone is not enough. That's not going to become cancer either. As a next step before it becomes malignancy, there's integration of the host cell genome and the viral genome. So these two GNAs have to merge together and an integration has to happen, and this is the integral part of development of a cervical malignancy. And then of course these transcribe, you all know that from the nucleus all these transcription for various proteins in the cell happen and the oncoproteins are generated, and these bind to the tumor suppressor cells and suppress the tumor suppressor cells, and that is how the cellular changes take place. This is just in a nutshell and an oversimplified version of how human papillomavirus causes cervical cancer. So the risk factors for persistence of HPV. Risk factor for acquiring HPV is obviously a sexual behavior. For persistence of HPV, it is a viral type, viral burden, immune status, maybe immunosuppression by drugs or HIV infection, smoking, infection by other microbial agents, and this is where the multiple sexual partners come into play. Sex hormones do have a role to play. Therefore, it is more common in multiparous women and in OCP users, and dietary factors. Now, progression from normal cervix to cancer, please again, I recapitulate. Those who are infected, 80% regress, only 20% progress, and after it becomes low-grade squamous intraepithelial lesion, again 60 to 80% regress, only 15 to 20% progress, and from HSIL to malignancy, again only 20 to 30%. So you can see that of the whole lot of women who are infected, a small number basically progress to invasive cancer. If you histologically look at a section of the squamous epithelium, you can see that the ones that are in red are the malignant cells. When it occupies only the lower one-third, it is CIN1. When it extends to the middle third, it is CIN2. And when the changes with the cells with the malignant change extend to the full thickness, it is CIN3. Now, coming on to terminology, you must understand that the dysplasia terminology was replaced by the CIN terminology for cytology, and subsequently has been replaced by Bethesda terminology, wherein we use the term low-grade squamous intraepithelial lesion or high-grade squamous intraepithelial lesion. For cytologic diagnosis, the terms LSIL and HSIL have replaced cervical intraepithelial neoplasia. So I again re-emphasize that CIN is a histological diagnosis. A positive cytological test just tells you that there may be a CIN, so go do something more. It doesn't say that there definitely is a CIN. Now, how do we manage abnormal pap smears or abnormal screening tests? We had a whole lot, maybe some of us colposcoped them, some of us said come back later, some of us treated them, but subsequently the ASCCP, American Society of Colposcopists and Cytopathologists, have come up with very definite guidelines, algorithms published in 2012, available on the net. The algorithms may look complicated, but they are easy to follow. If you have unsatisfactory cytology on pap smear, what do we do? Very, very common. We need to repeat cytology after 2 to 4 months. That is very, very definite. I don't think you need to go and colposcope any of them. If you have a smear result which is negative but is marked by the absence of endocervical cells, this is the next grading in Bethesda system. You could do an HPV testing if available, or you could re-smear 3 years later. If you do an HPV testing, depending on whether it's positive or negative, you can decide on what you want to do. But if the cytology is reported as ascus, that is undetermined significance, HPV testing or re-smear after a year is actually enough. Now, if you have a report of low-grade squamous intraepithelial lesion, you look at there are 2-3 ways of managing it. If HPV testing is available, and most of us now do a co-testing. If they are negative HPV, you can re-smear 1 year later. If HPV is not available or they are positive for HPV, you need to probably colposcope them. Now, if the report is ASK-H, that is probably high grade, don't know, that is what this says. You need to colposcope them, because the minute a suspicion of a high grade lesion comes in, you need to colposcope. And if it is HSIL, there is no doubt you need to colposcope and perhaps do even a CN treat. If it is glandular cell abnormality, there is no doubt you need to do a colposcopy with endocervical curettage or sampling. This is in a nutshell. This actually consists of about 8 separate algorithms. In order not to confuse you in a pre-lunch session, I have put it all together and summarized it in one slide. What to do after you do a HPV testing, what do you do after a colposcope, it's all given in the guidelines, and I'm sure all of you know what is to be done. So this is how an abnormal smear or abnormal screen test is actually handled. Now, there are special situations. The 2 special situations are adolescents and pregnant women. Why are they special? Adolescents there's a very high prevalence of HPV infection or incidence of HPV infection in the adolescents, because they acquire it a lot. But also remember that there is a very high regression rate, and therefore you should not act on a positive HPV test in the adolescent. So we need to follow a more conservative approach, and certainly there should be no CN treat followed. Now, pregnant women, colposcopy is preferred even in low-grade lesion, but any management, any invasive procedure should be postponed till delivery. Now, coming to colposcopic analysis, the next step in the evaluation being colposcopic analysis, whenever you have an LSIL with HPV positive or HSIL or an AGC. So, when you do a colposcopy, look for the nature of the lesion, look for the extent of the lesion. By nature of the lesion, do you make a colposcopic diagnosis of CIN2? Do you say this is CIN3? Could it be, is it negative with a positive cytology, and therefore what do we need to do? That is basically what you need to look at. How far does it extend? Because you need to decide, can I cryo it, can I laser it, can I leap it, or do you have to do a cone? Directed biopsy is actually recommended in all, so that you have a histopathological diagnosis of CIN before you actually treat, and a decision regarding cone biopsy again has to be made at this point in time. This is just a few colposcopic pictures to show you just the columnar grape-like columnar epithelium. Nice large mosaics that you can see with punctation, CIN3 perhaps, just the papillomavirus white aceto-white epithelium with very minimal or faint mosaics, probably HPV with CIN1, probably microinvasive malignancy. Now, the general guidelines for management of cervical intraepithelial neoplasia, as in you have got a smear, you have colposcoped them, you have biopsied them, and now you have made a histological diagnosis of cervical intraepithelial neoplasia. What do we do? Never treat without colposcopy and histopathology. I think this is the 3rd time I am saying it. Never treat without excluding an invasive cancer. This is what you do when you do the colposcope and the biopsy. Entire squamocolumnar junction must be visible, and entire transformation zone should be ablated or excised, whatever method of treatment you are following. Now, remember, a few points have to be remembered when you are managing women with cervical intraepithelial neoplasia. Point number 1, regression rates for CIN1 are high. Therefore, you don't have to be very aggressive when you are treating CIN1. Number 2, risk of occult CIN2 or 3 is low in CIN1, which are preceded by LSIL or ASCUS. which is only 3.8. So you have a smear which is LSIL or Ascus, and you colposcope and biopsy and you get a CIN1, all of them correlate, and you know that you can actually either just follow them up or do nothing at all and see them 6 months or a year later, because the risk of an associated or occult CIN2-3 that you are missing is very, very low. If on the other hand, the risk of CIN2 or 3 is much higher if this was preceded by HSIL or an ASK-H cytology. That is, you have an HSIL or ASK-H cytology, you colposcope and biopsy, you get the report as a CIN1. Remember that there could be a 15% possibility of an occult malignancy. So you need to do something. You perhaps do a LEEP excision in these women. Now, distinction between CIN2 and 3 is difficult. Regression rates are low with CIN2 and 3, and therefore definitive management is indicated and recurrence rates are high. Both these reasons why you certainly have to treat HSIL of CIN2 and 3. Now, management of CIN1 histology preceded by LSIL or Ascus cytology, followed with co-testing after 12 months, and if positive for HPV or for CIN 12 months later, do a colposcopy and treat. If on the other hand they are preceded by ASK-H or HSIL cytology, you have to do a colposcopy, you have to do a diagnostic excisional procedure or do a co-testing. But diagnostic excisional procedure is what is preferred, co-testing is only acceptable. So remember, colposcope and excise is probably what you should do for CIN1, which is preceded by a cytology of ASK-H or HSIL. Now, management of CIN2/3 histology is very, very straightforward. You colposcope all of them. If colposcopy is adequate or satisfactory, you do an excision or an ablation. If on the other hand, if it is unsatisfactory or inadequate, the lesion is recurrent and or endocervical curettage positive, you need to definitely do a diagnostic excision. An ablation is not recommended here. That's what I'm trying to say. The difference between this and this is that here ablation is okay because you have a histopathology diagnosis and you can see the lesion very well, so you can do an ablation, you can burn it. Whereas here, even though we have a histological diagnosis, you are not able to see the complete transformation zone. It is receded into the endocervical canal and it's recurrent or ECC positive. So you need to do an excision procedure and get histopathology, the entire thing for histopathological examination. Now, observation and follow-up are unacceptable for CIN2 and 3. Hysterectomy as a first-line procedure is unacceptable for CIN2 and 3. You cannot do a hysterectomy just for this diagnosis. What do we do with a adenocarcinoma in situ? Hysterectomy is a preferred treatment. Conservative surgery only if the woman is young or infertile. Now, ablative or excisional procedure, I am not going to go into great detail. The success rates with various methods like cryo, electrocoagulation, laser and LEEP are all comparable. They are all in the 90+%, but obviously not many of us use electrocoagulation for treatment of CIN2 and 3 now. The laser is more or less out. Cryo, some people use, especially when they're doing a CN treat, and so the most popular method of management is obviously a LEEP or a LETS. There are also other differences in the sense that there is no tissue available when you do an electrocautery and a cryocautery, and the squamocolumnar junction also retracts into the endocervical canal with the cryotherapy. Now, LEEP is a good, gives you good tissue for histopathological examination. It's good for CN treat. It's easy to learn and has a low complication rate. You could choose the size of the wire loop depending on the size of the lesion that you have estimated by doing a prior colposcopy. And of course, this is the way you do a LEEP. I'm sure I don't have to go into the details. Now, when do we do a cone? We do a cone biopsy when the lesion extends into the endocervical canal, when histological diagnosis of adenocarcinoma in situ has been made, when there is a recurrent AGC cytology. Cytology and histology do not agree. You have a HSIL cytology with a negative colposcopy or a negative histology, suspected microinvasive cancer, recurrent high-grade lesion, and lesions which are very large. I just have 2 more slides to wind up. This is how you do a cone. It could be a wide one, it could be a narrow one, it could be a broad-based one, depending on the colposcopic findings. Do we do hysterectomy? Are there any indications for hysterectomy in CIN? When there is an associated gynae pathology like a large fibroid that you really want to remove, maybe. When you feel that the woman is difficult to come for follow-up after having had a CIN3 excised query. Microinvasive carcinoma S, adenocarcinoma in situ S, CIN3 with cold margins involved in older women are difficult to follow, and recurrent high-grade lesion. These are the definitive indications. One side on prevention, to say that everybody is talking of HPV vaccine, and so I'm sure there will be a lot of questions, so I thought I'll forestall them by talking about it. Reproductive and sexual health measures, routine screening are the two methods by which you can prevent it. HPV vaccines are coming in a big way. Quadrivalent ones are available. We all know the dose and we all know how to use it. Thank you for your attention.